Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. M.N. Gupta, Emeritus Professor at IIT Delhi. Today we are going to talk on the module which we are calling Immunotechnology 2. So it's essentially a continuation of looking at the various techniques which are involved in immunology. The paper, of course, naturally is again immunology. We will see that a variety of assays have been developed which can detect the presence. Detecting a presence is a qualitative work, but we can also measure the concentration of a specific antigen or an antibody. This business of interchanging a specific antigen or antibody will come up most of the time in many of these techniques, and it largely is based upon the fact that if we know about the nature or if we know about the amount of antigen, then that helps us in knowing the corresponding information about the antibody. If we know our antibody, the specificity of this interaction helps us in gathering the corresponding information about the antigen preparations, antigen molecules, antigenic cells, and so on and so forth. These immunoassays which we are going to talk in this module are based upon labeling either the antigen or antibody molecules. So, what are the objectives of today's module? They are to understand that in many cases concentration of the antigen or antibody is too small to be measured by their precipitation or by following an agglutination in such cases. Please recall that in the last module, all our techniques which we talked about either utilize this precipitation process or they utilized this phenomenon of agglutination, where things sort of form a clump or they cluster around each other, driven by these specific or non-specific interactions. Once this interaction has taken place, which is the same on which the earlier techniques were based, but now what we are going to do is that rather than simply measuring the amount of antigen antibody complex, we are going to label one of the interacting partner, and the idea is that this leads to the higher sensitivity in our measurements. Now, depending upon these labels, various techniques have been developed. However, it is very necessary to understand that while there are plethora of techniques which use variety of labels, we will cover many of these, but we are not going to be dealing with it very comprehensively because there are large number of techniques, basically variations of what we are going to talk about, because you can use in principle many kinds of labels in biochemistry. So the labels which we are going to be largely focusing upon, the important ones, are the using of a radioactivity label. In the early days of life sciences, biochemistry, and of course immunology, the availability of the compounds or molecules, or our learning how to do that, and we will see that how do we actually label these antigens or antibodies with the radioactive labels. This was very valuable because a small amount of radioactive label generates a very amplified signal. With time, in general, we have found that the use of the radioactivity has to be minimized. People in general feel that we should discourage the use of the radioactivity unless it is absolutely necessary. For the use of the radioactive labels, you also have to have regulatory agencies in all countries, including ours in India, approving your request to be able to use radioactive labels in any setting, in any discipline. Because of these, increasingly the use of the radioactive labels, including in immunology, is slowly phasing out. However, the antigen or antibody molecules can also be linked with enzymes, or they could be linked with another simple affinity ligand. All this and more we will look at in this module. Yeah. So what are the concepts which we are going to cover? We will continue to look at the primary binding assays. We defined what primary binding assays are in the last module. We will learn how to enhance this precipitation, so that, because please remember that when we write antigen plus antibody leading to antigen antibody complex, we normally show it as an equilibrium reaction. So any reaction which is an equilibrium reaction has to be driven to completion. So we will learn how to enhance this precipitation by using the radioactive labels. We will see radioimmunoassays. We will also look at the subsequently developed techniques which today are so widely used in so many spheres, and these are the so-called immunoenzyme assays. There is a large number of variations of these immunoenzyme assays too. We will look at some of them. We will try to identify what enzymes are good to be used as a label in these enzyme assays. In the earlier module, we looked at some methods which allow us to detect or measure antigen or antibody in a given sample. These methods were based upon some phenomena which are a consequence of antigen-antibody interaction, like precipitin formation and agglutination. There are another set of methods which are called primary binding tests. These tests or methods are based upon the formation of immune complex under equilibrium conditions. The first common key strategy element in these methods is to separate the immune complex. The second commonality is to use some label which allows us to measure the amount of immune complex. For any given pair of antigen and antibody, as we have learnt, there is an equilibrium constant known which is governed by avidity. So, if one of the pair, say antibody, is kept constant, the amount of the other member of the pair, in this case antigen, in the immune complex will depend upon the amount of this antigen present in the immune complex. So, if the antibody is labeled, the amount of the label ending in the complex will depend upon the antigen concentration. So, these methods depend upon the kind of labels which are used. The two labels which are discussed in this module are radionuclide. In this case, generally iodine radioisotopes are used. The amount of the radionuclide in the immune complex can be directly measured in a gamma counter. The second kind of a label which we will be discussing is actually an enzyme. The amount of the enzyme is measured in terms of the units of activity. Hence, the enzyme in the bound form is assayed under the standard assay conditions using a well-known substrate. In principle, all the numerous conditions used for enzyme assays can be used. In practice, enzymes generating colored products are used. This enables such assays to be conducted also in multi-titer plates. Primary binding tests in general are more sensitive than the secondary binding tests which we discussed in the last module. The first example of this class of methods is Farse technique or Farse method. This method is generally used for estimation of an antibody against an antigen in the given antisera. Hence, antigen is labeled and added in a reasonable excess to the antiserum. The amount of label ending in the antigen antibody complex is proportional to the antibody present in the antiserum. Farse method relies upon the precipitation of immunoglobulins in the presence of 40 to 50% ammonium sulfate saturation. It is assumed that the antigen is not precipitated under these conditions. Although precipitation of the uncomplexed antibody expectedly does take place and does not matter, the method in its unmodified form cannot be used with those antigens which also precipitate under these conditions. Subsequently, 2% polyethylene glycol has also been used in place of ammonium sulfate. So, how about those antigens which are precipitated by the ammonium sulfate at the saturation level of 40 to 50%? As we mentioned, in some of the variations, salt can be replaced by PEG, but instead of either of the two, we can use an anti-immunoglobulin for precipitation of the complex and free antibody. This makes it possible to work with those antigens which are precipitated by both ammonium sulfate or PEG. For example, complexes of antigen with rabbit antibody can be precipitated with goat antibody raised against the rabbit immunoglobulins. In this case, also adequate amount of non-specific rabbit immunoglobulins are added to ensure quantitative precipitation. The precipitates in all these approaches can be solubilized and run on SDS page. these approaches have been developed more recently. Anti-immunoglobulin procedure also has one additional versatility. The distribution of antibody against the various classes of immunoglobulin can be estimated. For example, if anti-IgA is used as the precipitating immunoglobulin, only free IgA and IgA antigen complex from the population of Ig in the antibody will be precipitated and will be estimated. Burson and Rosalind Yellow developed a very powerful technique called radioimmunoassay in 1960 for quantifying the amount of insulin present in plasma. Rosalind Yellow was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1977 for the development of radioimmunoassay. Radioimmunoassay can measure an antigen at the picogram level. The wide range of applications of RIA, as it is called, include hormones, steroids, drugs, prostaglandins, viruses, and surface antigens. Quite often, it is the antigen which needs to be assayed in biological fluids such as blood sera or in similar complex mixtures. In such cases, the antigen can be added to a microtiter plate. The binding to the plate material is through non-covalent bonds. The unbound antigen is washed away. The rest of the plate surface is blocked by a protein such as bovine serum albumin to prevent subsequent non-specific binding. The test antibody is added at this point. Unbound antibody is washed away. Now a labeled ligand is added, which is often anti-immunoglobulin, to the known test antibody or even IgA. The bound radioactivity can be counted. A standard curve between the radioactivity versus amount of test antibody added can be generated. A short linear range over and above the background count before the plateau region is obtained. The plateau binding should be about 20 to 100 times the background in a well-run assay. The competition format makes sure that the result is indeed due to specific binding between the suspected antigen and test antibody. Also, it allows a greater linear range. In this format, rather than adding just the test antibody, increasing amount of free suspected antigen is added along with a fixed amount of test antibody. Higher this amount of right free antigen, lower is the subsequent count. This method is based upon the fact that the antigen antibody complex does not bind to the antigen bound to the plate. The radioallergosorbent test, which is generally referred to simply as RAST, is essentially a radioimmunoassay adopted to estimate IgE specific to a suspected allergen. We had already mentioned that IgE is the type of the immunoglobulins which are involved in allergic responses. In both classical RIA and RAST, the antigen, which is the allergen in RAST, can also be covalently bound to the plate. In this case, the radiolabeled ligand is the immunoglobulin against human IgE. RAST is a valuable method to detect allergy against a suspected allergen. The various steps for the RAST are shown in this figure. RIST is a RAST conducted in the competition format for measuring the total serum IgE. In this test, radioimmunosorbent test, the surface of the well or even a cellulose disc has the anti-IgE immunoglobulin bound to it. Now increasing amount of labeled IgE, which is acting as antigen in this case, is added to determine 80% of the maximum IgE which can bind. In the second stage, this amount of labeled IgE, which is the antigen, is mixed with the test serum in which IgE is being estimated and added to the well containing the anti-IgE. Both labeled IgE and unlabeled IgE in the test serum competes with the bound anti-IgE antibody. As before, a standard curve can be generated. Can also be carried out in a non-competitive format, and sometimes the non-competitive RIST is used. In this case, the patient antibody is added to the solid phase anti-IgE. It binds specifically. As a second step, the enzyme labeled anti-immunoglobulin is added and it binds to the patient antibody. The excess enzyme is washed away. The color development is proportional to the patient antibody present, because as always the enzyme which is normally used here as a label is the one which creates colored products. In radioimmunoassays described so far, it has been mentioned that radioactive iodine is used to label antigen or antibody. In some cases, if you are using a common antigen or common antibody, because many of these are used as a standard experimental systems and many people use it. So if your choice belongs to such systems, then the label product may be commercially available. You can just get it out of a good vendor. However, in many cases, this labeling has to be done in-house. So, and also if the molecules or the cells is not available in the radio labeled form, you need to learn how to do it yourself. So, it's very important to learn the basic techniques of radio labeling. In any case, this kind of a knowledge is very important, because often we start using these techniques in the form of a black box. Some region came out of a vial or a tube and we used it. Sometime if the approach doesn't work, then understanding that the reagent which we are using out of a vial, how this was created by the vendor, not in terms of the commercial aspects of the economics and so on and so forth, but it's science, it's chemistry. How was it labeled and what could have gone wrong, and why in my particular case this is not working. This also, so knowledge of radio labeling in that way is helpful. So let us look at it. Two gamma emitting radioisotopes of iodine are available, 125 iodine and 131 iodine. The advantage of gamma emitter isotopes is that the label can be estimated directly in a gamma counter, and the count rate is much higher than the beta emitting radionucleotides. Of the two radioisotopes of iodine, 125 iodine with a higher half-life of 60 days is preferred. The method most widely used one for radioiodination is the chloramine T method. The reaction is shown in the slide. This is also most extensively used for labeling antibodies. Radioactive iodine is oxidized by chloramine T. However, this involves strong oxidizing conditions and it is not recommended for proteins which are likely to get denatured under such conditions. Experimentally, in the chloramine T method, the antibody is mixed with 125 iodine and chloramine T is also mixed with it. The mixture is incubated for about 30 seconds. After that, sodium bisulfite solution is added to stop the iodination. The iodinated antibody is purified. In cases where the protein gets inactivated, one can try using the less amount of chloramine T if it works. pH optimum for this reaction aims at primarily iodinating tyrosine residues and is around 7.5. Another method which is often used for the labeling by radioactive iodine is the lactoperoxidase method. The enzyme lactoperoxidase oxidizes 125 iodide to 125 iodine or cation of the 125 iodine. The reaction is shown in this slide. These radioactive species iodate mostly the tyrosine residues. The oxidation can be stopped by dilution. In this case, the presence of at least traces of H2O2 is necessary. While it is a milder method as compared to the chloramine T method, but the optimum reaction conditions vary greatly from system to system and they need to be standardized in each case. The protocol of the lactoperoxidase method is something like this. The antibody is taken in the range of 0.5 to 0.25 milligram per ml concentration. Sodium iodide with 125 iodine is added. Lactoperoxidase enzyme about 5 microliter from a stock solution of 20 microgram per ml is added. Everything so far is in 0.5 molar sodium acetate buffer at pH 5.6. The reaction is initiated by adding 10 microliter of 10 microgram per ml H2O2. Incubation for 20 minutes is carried out. The reaction is terminated by adding 0.05 molar phosphate buffer at pH 7.4. 0.1% bovine serum albumin solution is also added. The iodinated antibody is purified. The Bolton-Hunter method is another method. This is an acylation method and the acylating agent is shown here. It is N-succinimidyl 3,4-hydroxyphenyl propionate. A water-soluble Bolton-Hunter reagent is also available in the form of a sodium salt. The structure of the water-soluble Bolton-Hunter reagent is also shown here. The Bolton-Hunter reagents react with lysine side chains. This is valuable for proteins which lack tyrosine or histidine residues, or if these residues are essential residues for the activity of the proteins. Also, addition of a hydroxyphenyl group in the reagent makes it possible to further iodinate the protein. What can be actually done is that a Bolton-Hunter reagent can be iodinated prior to acylation of the protein to obtain the 125 iodine labeled reagent. The reagent could be the Bolton-Hunter reagent or its water soluble analog. 0.2 ml reagent labeled with 125 iodine is evaporated to dryness. The sample is cooled on ice, and 10 microliter of protein cooled in ice is added to this sample. These things are mixed and allowed to stand for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, 0.5 ml of the 0.2 molar glycine in borate buffer, 0.1 molar and at pH 8.5 is added. After 5 minutes, 0.5 molar sodium phosphate containing 0.25% gelatin is added and mixed. The iodinated antibody can be purified. We will now discuss the use of enzymes as a label. The use of enzymes avoids the use of radioactivity, as enzymes have high turnover number. In such assays, they are able to amplify the presence of the analyte. Hence, these enzymes linked immunosorbent assays have emerged as one of the most frequently used approaches among immunoassays. In enzyme linked immunosorbent assay, popularly known as ELISA, about 20 different enzymes have been used for as a label. 3 are most commonly used: alkaline phosphatase, beta galactosidase and peroxidase. The main considerations are that these enzymes are inexpensive, easy to assay, stable and have good turnover number. If required, appropriate substrates which generate fluorescent products enhances the sensitivity of the method. In this system, the ligand is a molecule that can detect the antibody and is covalently coupled to an enzyme such as peroxidase. This binds the test antibody, and after free ligand is washed away, the bound ligand is visualized by the addition of chromogen, which is a colorless substrate that is acted on by the enzyme portion of the ligand to produce a colored end product. A developed plate is shown in the another panel. The amount of the test antibody is measured by assessing the amount of colored end products by optical density scanning of the plate. In a variation which is called the sandwich ELISA, the plate is coated with suitable capture antibody and the blocking buffer is added to block the remaining protein binding sites on the plate. Sample is added to the plate and any antigen present is bound by the capture antibody. A suitable biotin labeled detection antibody is added to the plate and also binds to any antigen present in the well. Avidin can be added and it binds the biotin labeled detection antibody. TMB substrate is added and is converted to a colored product which is measured or detected. The differences between ELISA and sandwich ELISA can be seen here. In sandwich ELISA, the antigen is sandwiched between two antibodies. It is the second antibody which is labeled with the enzyme. Let's summarize today's lecture. We have learnt then antigen antibody can be estimated by mixing them. One of these is labeled. Which one is labeled depends upon what is being estimated and what is the design of the overall design of the immunoassay. In RIA and variants like RAST and GRIST, the label is generally 125 iodine. Some methods which are generally used for labeling antigen or antibody, we have at least learnt about them. Briefly, in ELISA, we learnt that the label is an enzyme which generates a colored product. So, I hope that you are able to appreciate that there is a great similarity in all direct assays described in this lecture. All assays used a label, generally attached to an antibody or antigen, mostly to an antibody. As the use of the radioactivity should be discouraged, enzymes as labels have emerged as more popular. Thank you.